Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I know this will be a matter of considerable interest to the Presiding Officer and other members. The Standards, Procedure and Public Appointments Committee is today also proposing some changes to the rules on Presiding Officer elections. The Scotland Act places a number of requirements on Parliament in relation to the election of presiding officers, rightly so, given the importance of the role. However, in the first few years of operation, it has become clear that the rules were rather too restrictive and some real operational difficulties have arisen. For example, when our first presiding officer, Sir David Steele, had to undergo an operation, his two deputies had to carry his workload between them. There was no scope to appoint a temporary deputy presiding officer to fill the gap. A different difficulty arose at the start of Session 3, when we had our first experience of minority government. Given the importance of every seat in the parliamentary arithmetic of that session, it took some time for possible candidates for presiding officer to emerge. And yet, the Parliament was required to elect a presiding officer at its first meeting. A procedural fix was devised, and we were able to elect Alec Ferguson on our second meeting day. But it was unsatisfactory, and it's something that could arise again in future. I see Alec Ferguson is volunteering already. The Scotland Act 2012 addressed both these problems. The changes which I am proposing today on behalf of the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee will translate the Scotland Act into standing orders. The first change will allow the presiding officer elections to take place at any time within 14 days of the general election, counting from the day after the poll. The oath-taking must be completed first, and no other business can take place until the presiding officer and deputies have been elected, but we are no longer restricted to the first meeting. The committee took the view that some flexibility was desirable. In general, the Parliament will want to elect the presiding officers as soon as possible so that it can get down to business, but that may not always be possible. So the rules we have drafted would allow the elections to take place on the first meeting day or at a later meeting, or indeed for the presiding officer to be elected on one day and the deputies on a subsequent day. The committee took the chance to review all the rules on presiding officer elections. Our conclusion was that they generally worked well, and we did not detect any appetite for significant changes. However, we did agree that the timetable was a little tight. So we are proposing that for both elections, there should be an hour between the close of nominations and the start of voting, rather than 15 minutes at present, a short space for members to reflect on and discuss the nominations before they have to vote. We are also proposing that there should be an hour rather than 15 minutes to submit nominations for deputy presiding officers. The rule changes will allow additional deputies to be appointed. The most likely reason for this is illness, but there could be other reasons. But we have left it to the presiding officer and the Bureau to decide when and for how long an additional deputy is needed, with the safeguard that any proposal must be agreed by the Parliament. The overall political balance of the presiding officer team is also protected by the new rules. As with the previous motion, the Parliament is invited to agree that these standing order changes should come into effect from the 3rd of February. I move motion 8833 that stands in my name.